to the legislatures.
Mr Chairman.
I'll call Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I'm happy to take a call on this, although I have to say I'm disappointed the Minister hasn't yet taken the opportunity to stand up and allay the concerns being raised by members on this side of the House.
He didn't allay them at all.
He did not allay them at all. And Mr Chairman, I have to say, look, I'm not an expert on telecommunications issues, but I do know that the people living in my electorate and electorates around the country value having their free local calls. They value the transparency that exists around that arrangement at the moment because it's a legislative provision under the Kiwi Share obligation. That means that they know in the Act that they know that they will be able to ring their next-door neighbour. The little old ladies at the street know they can pick up the phone and ring their next-door neighbour, make sure they're all right, arrange to have a cup of tea, and they're not going to be charged for that because under the current law it's prohibited. They're guaranteed their free local calls. And that was something the government put in place at the time when Telecom was sold because New Zealanders were concerned that privatisation of Telecom would result in them paying more. And so one of the things that the government of the day did when they wrongly sold Telecom, I have to say, they put in place a guarantee that New Zealanders would have their free local calls. This amendment, this SOP, slipped in by the dark prince of the National Party, slipped onto the order paper this afternoon by Stephen Joyce, says that the SOP reflects the fact that the Kiwi Share obligation will no longer be operative following the structural separation of Telecom. So what does that mean for ordinary New Zealanders who haven't followed this debate? It means the legislation will no longer protect their free local calls. They will no longer have that protection which they have come to count on. So what I want to hear from Stephen Joyce is how is he going to guarantee that New Zealanders continue to have free local calls? Or is that out the window? Are they going to lose their free local calls? It could be a very brief description from the Minister. It does not need to take a huge amount of time. I just want him to stand up and say, will free local calls continue to exist under the national government? And if they will, how will he ensure that? Will it be a contractual obligation? If so, what surety will New Zealanders have that the contract may not be renegotiated in the future and they'll lose their free local calls? Will it be inserted into the legislation somewhere else? If so, where's the SOP that's going to do that? If Kiwi Share is now dead and buried, which this SOP suggests that it is, how will he ensure that New Zealanders who rely on the Kiwi Share obligations, even though they probably don't understand what they are, probably don't care either, they just want to know that when they pick up the phone to make their local calls it's free, or when they're in an area that's covered, when they're in an area that's covered. Well, look, Skype is a fantastic technology, and actually if the government ever gets around to delivering the broadband it promised New Zealanders at the last election, then more people would be able to use it. But given the dismal failure rate they've had so far at actually delivering on their broadband promises, I'm not going to be holding my breath. I have to say my broadband's provided by Telecom. It's absolutely hopeless. It was much better when it was provided by Telstra. But that's a whole nother part of the debate, and I look forward to contributing to that later on. But what I do want to hear, and what the people in my electorate will want to hear, as in other electorates around the country, is how they're going to be assured by this government that their free local calls are still going to be provided. How are people in those areas, those other areas who may not have the services, that they have come to rely upon anymore if the Kiwi Share obligation is dead and buried, as Stephen Joyce seems to think that it is? How are they going? Well, where's the surety for them? And I'd like to see this minister stand up in the House and give a clear explanation to those people, because this is actually significant. It's very important for people to know that the free local calls is one of the things that we really value in New Zealand. People in my electorate really value it. People around the country, I think, really value it. There are a huge number of reasons why it should not be taken away, reasons around social isolation. I'm particularly concerned about older citizens who live around the country who rely on these free local calls so that they can actually keep in contact with the rest of the world, with their families, with their neighbours. If it's taken away, there's a safety element to it. And, look, Stephen Joyce may well have a great explanation that guarantees that the free local calls are going to be continuing. It's not clear from this. It's not clear from what he's said so far, and he's shaking his head, which makes me think free local calls are dead and buried under the national government, and I think that would be absolutely disgraceful.
Chris Tremaine.
Chair,